Welcome to the Procuretech Podcast, where we aim to excite and inspire you about how technology will shape our profession's future. I'm your host, James Meads, and I worked in corporate procurement for 16 years before starting my own business as a content creator and consultant in the procurement technology space. I'm deeply convinced that procurement must become less technocratic and embrace the entrepreneurial spirit and creativity if we're ever going to shake off our image of being a process-obsessed, box-ticking function. You definitely won't find vanilla content on here, and we're not afraid to tackle some controversial topics and tell it like it really is. So if that's your thing, now let's jump right into this week's episode. Yes, hello, and a very warm welcome to the Procuretech Podcast. We're back again with another show, and this time we're taking a trip across the Atlantic and way down south to the land of samba and football, because my guest today is a founder of a procurement tech company from Sao Paulo in Brazil. And we're going to be touching on the topic of how is procurement and supply chain technology in Brazil and Latin America at large, because we hear so much and we see so much about what's going on in North America and in Europe. And obviously, they're the biggest markets. That's where most of our listeners come from. But the world is becoming so much smaller. And some of these emerging markets are really experiencing huge levels of growth and investment. And, functions like procurement and supply chain are maturing much, much faster, which obviously then begs the question, well, is there then a good market for growth in procurement and supply chain tech as well as the wider economy? So Leo Cavalcanti, CEO and founder of Linkana, a very warm welcome to the show.
Hey, James. So happy. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. As you know, I've been hearing your podcast for a couple of years, I would say, right now. I love your material. That's how I got to know most of my great influences, just as Eloise Epstein and all of those other people that you had around and you discuss and you write about. So it's kind of very amazing to be the one being interviewed here as of right now and to talk a little bit more about what we're doing in the procurement space in Latam.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. And it's actually a part of the world that I really, really like. I have a huge affinity for Argentina and Buenos Aires. I love the city and the culture, and their football team, not so much. So we probably share something in common there. But I love just the slower pace of life and the steak and the wine and the good life in Latin America. But I guess that doesn't pay the bills. We all have to work. So let's talk procurement technology. Can you, first of all, just give us a quick intro to your company, Linkana, and just explain what problem does it solve and who do you solve it for, just to set the scene of where we're approaching this from?
Yeah, of course. Just as a little bit of context, Linkana is a supplier data management for enterprise companies here in Latam, more focused on Brazil, where we started and where we have our base and of our technology being built. And Linkana basically builds a solution based on the idea that the way procurement technology deals with supplier data is very bad, right? So that's not a very new idea. I would say some big people, just as Eloise Epstein agrees with me. You had a lot of people discussing that also here in our podcast. And that's basically describes the way that technology and tools are building their supplier database. It's very custom heavy. It's very siloed. In a way, everybody's building their own. Everybody's building their questionnaires, formulas. They're storing data in a very specific way. In a way, this data cannot be shared, cannot be reused between other procurement corporations or between buyers in different companies. It's like if a supplier sends data to be registered or for a compliance check or for the licenses certifications to, I don't know, the biggest beverage company here in Brazil. If he does the same for the next company, he has to start all over again to do it all over again. And that's kind of very bad for the suppliers, kind of a very shitty experience in a way. But for buyers, that means that they have to have the best process based on what they have internally. Like I have to build my own ESG area, my own cybersecurity department, and everybody has to have the best practice internally at home to be able to analyze the supplier in the best way possible. So Linkana was built on the idea that we can change that. So we are the first shared supplier data solution for data here for companies in Brazil. And our differentiator or what Linkana does is based on creating the standards very powered by technology. So we kind of have of the data that we already know from companies, since from tax ID to licenses for financial statements and questionnaires, the things that we need to know in order to do business with suppliers. Linkana basically create all of the standards to unify a way to view a supplier. We call it our own universal shared supplier profiles in Linkana. It's kind of the open banking or open finance for procurement in a way. But we do it in a way that the collection and validation of data must be also very automated. So it doesn't make sense for us that you have to ask suppliers to send everything or for the validation to be very manual or done by people, not from people by Linkana or not people from the supplier side or buyer side. So we basically are automating most of the data validation from big data, robots, and most recently AI as well. So we have a lot of things going on for those solutions to get much better, faster and cheaper. And to be able to have the main standards of data, we also believe we're the best. Those tools are the best to create the best insights to analyze those data. So we have our own proprietary ratings in order to define what's a good supplier or what's not. We're very focused on financial and ESG ratings as of right now, but we believe on our very broad global rating in which would be able to analyze even commercial, historic data from suppliers, their previous relationships, because we believe that's the very special value hidden behind this very chaotic data, supplier data ecosystem that we currently have on the greatest e-procurements. And Linkana is currently changing that. We're doing that for about 4 years here in LATAM, and we have over 100 enterprise procurement brands that are already using our data and rating solutions here down in Brazil.
Got it. Okay, so it's kind of then a mix between a supplier discovery tool, but also a supplier due diligence platform. If you're scraping and pulling all of the data and unifying it into one uniform format that your customers can then view and use as part of their evaluation of any particular vendor that they're transacting with. Got it. Okay.
Kind of, we call it like a B2B LinkedIn. You can search suppliers.
B2B LinkedIn, yeah.
And you can use that as filters to find and to maintain good business with suppliers. So we do have those both value propositions as of right now being used. So you're perfect on the statement.
Yeah. So selling procurement technology is hard in North America and in Europe, not just because of the economy right now, but generally speaking, it's always been something that has had fairly low adoption. And yes, it's changing, but it's changing much slower than I think every one of us in the industry would like it to. So how does that compare in Brazil or in Latin America in general? Are companies seeing the benefit of what a platform like Linkana would deliver, beyond the large multinational corporates, or is it something that's tough to sell there too?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because I agree, and I think everybody in the industry agrees that procurement is a slow industry. We kind of have to ask the same questions and kind of talk about the same problems over and over again, and the same providers are dominating. Everybody is saying bad things about the leaders, and things seem not to change in the faster pace than other industries do. And I agree on that. It's a funny story because I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about that with the head of procurement from Google here, Google Latam. I had him in my podcast. We also have a podcast, not as famous or not as big as yours, James, but we talk about the professional from the industry. I hope I have you there someday. You have to make your Portuguese better for my audience to understand what we are discussing. But we're exactly talking about the maturity of procurement organizations. He wrote a piece about the difference in maturity from organizations from here, from Brazil and Latin specifically compared from organizations in Europe. And you kind of see the difference when he analyzes that we are even more lower on the scale of maturity, even more infant in terms of processes, or the priority in terms of organizations in like, for example, having or not a CPO, a C-level on the table that's specialized in procurement in terms of processes. We're unfortunately still, I don't know, I would say 5 or 10 years behind you guys. And like you said, it's not like your guys are like on the future or on the vanguard. You guys are also seeing a lot of things that need to be better. So that's kind of a very big challenge to be in procurement here in Latin, to build a provider like we're currently doing in our landscape. And when we talk about, or when we compare that to LATAM in a broader sense, I would say Brazil is the biggest market naturally. And I would say for the way those companies are built in terms of their business units, Brazil is very dominant on their operations. So mainly, I would say most of the innovation or the decisions are being made here in Brazil. So I would say most of the new providers and the solutions that are being built are happening and are currently being built also here. But we see a lot of things also happening in Mexico or Argentina or Colombia. It's still, I would say, still very early days, because the way people thought in the last 2 decades or so was in a very centralized way of seeing procurement. Like, yeah, let's take what we did in the US and put it in Brazil, let's replicate all of the globe.
And it doesn't work, right?
And now I think people are realizing that doesn't work. Like, it's not possible to have one single gigantic solution to be the solver. You have to have localized solutions to be more customized or more adapted to their local needs. But I think we're now seeing those tides turn, so it's still early days to say that's already a reality that's growing and moving fast as we want to.
And where are the biggest tech hubs when it comes to startups and innovation, across the continent as a whole? If we say, from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, where would you say the major hubs are?
I would say here in Brazil, certainly São Paulo. I would say it would take 90% of the whole Brazilian market. Like, things are happening in São Paulo. It's kind of sad to say that, because we do have other tech hubs more in Northeast Brazil, some others in South, but São Paulo really is kind of a gravity center for money, for innovation, for industries. Our economy is like, we call it the locomotive of the country. It's like if São Paulo it's like Brazil was down for the last year because of COVID and all of the other things. The only state that was growing through COVID was São Paulo. It's like, it's incredible the amount of money and the amount of things that are being built here. And we say, if São Paulo goes down, Brazil probably will go down much faster, because in a way, that's why Linkana, it's also being built in São Paulo.
Yeah.
All the founders were not born in São Paulo, but we know it would be much harder to try to do something different in another state. But seeing like Latam as a whole, it's kind of, like I say, Brazil has a very dominant position. When we talk about size and market share, we have Brazil having like around 50% of the market in terms of size, and all of the other countries combined would go to the other half, So it doesn't really make sense for me as a provider to start expanding like crazy internationally, because if I really make something work in Brazil, I'm kind of enjoying a very good share of this market. And in a way, it's hard to make an exchange between Brazil and Latam because we're kind of the only country speaking Portuguese. That creates a barrier of the cultural mix that happens in other countries, not as easy, and vice versa. So for them to come here, we have a lot of examples that had a lot of more problems, so to say. But I do believe that in second place, I would put some Mexico. That's a very growing, that has a very growing technology industry. Things are going fast there. I was there for the last couple months to understand a little bit better for the Spanish side of things, to know more of the culture, how people think, because we really believe that's something we want to do in the long term, to expand to those other countries, but not as of right now for the reasons that I just told you. And I would put like Argentina and Colombia just there as all other countries that are interesting. But as I said, they are much smaller. When we talk about headcount, people, markets, it's like it doesn't really compare to the broader picture when we talk about LATAM, you know?
Got it. So Brazil number one, Mexico number two, and then Argentina, Colombia as the other major players. Okay. So you touched upon the language barrier already, or the difference. Brazil obviously being Portuguese speaking, and the rest of LATAM Spanish speaking. Does that have an impact in terms of, so if you're perhaps a foreign vendor of procurement technology and you're coming in and looking at this as a market, I guess you'd probably take Brazil as a completely separate entity, right? Because not only the size of the market, but also the language, your strategy is probably going to be different for Brazil than the rest of the continent.
Totally. And like I said before, I do believe that the future of procurement goes through a more decentralized approach to the way people deal with solutions and value propositions. For example, Linkana's biggest differentiator is the fact that we really know data in a localized way. We're not talking about the way to analyze an American or supplier on an European, Spanish, or Belgian or Hungarian supplier, but we're talking about analyzing a Brazilian company. That means we have like tax ID information, certificate, licenses, tax environment, financial environment, ESG environment, in a very specific way in which it wouldn't be easy to replicate if I go to Mexico or the UX, for example. So I believe that's the first challenge that every solution that's seeing this as a differentiator needs to know. That's not easy only, let's build I have a workflow solution that's very like process based. So if I kind of create a translation to my solution, I couldn't really replicate that. Like, I don't know, those Slack or Monday or those very workflow based solution. That's kind of easy because there's no differentiator in terms of data or
it's
something.
It's generic. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's the word, And that's the first challenge. That's one of the main reasons that I know it's hard to say, let's go to Mexico. That's not only a language problem. And also culturally, it may seem like it may be hard to know when you don't know our landscape, but it's kind of like Europe, Every country is very different, and we don't really have this European Union kind of way to approach everyone. Even the economic frontiers are not that open. Countries are not trading or exchanging people as fast and as commonly as Europe does, for example. So in terms of culture, there are a lot of problems or differences when you compare. For example, I was just in Mexico. I was talking to some other founders that did this movement like, hey, let's move from Brazil to Mexico, or let's move from Mexico to Brazil. And one of the things that they said was, there's a very big company here in Brazil that's from real estate. They're doing renting. They're like a platform for renting apartments, and and they're like huge here in Brazil, like one of our unicorns, like very big. A couple of years ago, they tried to expand to Mexico, and their strategy was, hey, we're big. Let's just translate everything. Let's hire some people to look to Mexico and everything will go all right, right? And Mexicans are very locally based. They don't like foreign solutions. They like things that are local. They don't like people talking. Don't understand. So it was like a huge fail, It didn't work. They spent millions trying to go there. They had to go back. Not a good strategy. On the other side of things, for example, we had Nubank. That's our greatest fintech here. Did IPO in NASDAQ and all of the other things. They had a completely different approach. They started in Mexico, and people in Mexico don't even know Nubank is a Brazilian solution because they kind of create all the brand, the language already very Mexican based off the people locally hired. So they already did things very right. And Nubank is growing faster than in Brazil as of right now, for example. So those things are very specific and you have to know them if you really want to expand in a good way. And if you don't have the resources, you shouldn't do that because you're probably going to experience trouble. That's how I'm kind of strategizing that when I think about Linkana and our next movements,
Yeah, so pick one market and just really adapt and tailor your solution for that market is the best approach. Yeah. Have you seen many North American or European procurement and supply chain tech companies try to come into Brazil or to Mexico or anywhere else in Latin America and have a reasonably successful launch, or generally is it more local solutions that dominate the market?
I would say our local ecosystem is now growing. Like the local solutions, they are all being built, I don't know, in the 5 or last 10 years when we talk about the broader procurement ecospace. But I think when we talk about solutions in our procurement markets, that was very dominated by the biggest e-procurement. So when I talk about our enterprise environment, we're talking about SAP Ariba and the provider that are dominating the whole space.
Yeah.
But most recently, we saw the contenders coming here down south. So Coupa did an important movement, creating a branch interested here in Latam, for example. We're seeing now GAP that also wants to come here. They bought a very important company in our space.
Cost drivers.
Yeah, of course. I know Eric, so he's a friend here down south. So everybody's seeing this as a broader movement. Of course, it started more focused on the e-procurement, so the transactional central hub unit of those providers. And I would say since the other stuff is more, I would say more local adherence. So if you talk about, risk solution providers or ESG analysis provider, geopolitical, those guys have those challenges that I just told you. If you talk about EcoVadis or Interos, it's harder for them to specialize in data or a region. They really don't have the data or the experience or the knowledge of the regulatory landscape in their heads. So I would say the short answer would be, on the e-procurement providers, yeah, those guys are coming. They're seeing the opportunity and it's growing. For the localized solution of the ecosystem that's being built near the e-procurement, I would say the local solutions are growing faster and are getting more space even in the enterprise side. It's not that we don't have e-procurements locally. We have like big providers as well. We have like Mercado Electronico, it's a solution that works also in the US, expanding globally. For example, it's an e-procurement that we have here, and enterprise solutions are using them. But I would say e-procurement is kind of the big gravity center in which the ecosystem is now getting more mature to walk by itself and not to rely on what US or Europe is building,
Yeah, and by e-procurement, I guess you're referring to procure to pay or source to pay as a wider segment. So, as you said, the Coupas, the Aribas, the GEPs, and as long as you, I guess, from a technical perspective, as long as you can cope with how tax invoices and VAT and all of the fiscal stuff works, then it's relatively easy to copy and paste that solution into different countries. And I guess if they've done that if they're American and they've done that in Europe, or if they're European and they've done that in the US and in Canada, then doing it in LATAM is just one more step, right? It's nothing that they have to think from scratch.
Yeah, I think that's a yes and no answer, because you're right in terms of theory craft. That makes perfect sense. We have the solution. Companies are there. They have the same company. So many times, I have my branch here in Brazil, so let's just put the solution that's already working on the German branch down there. But like I said, the maturity of procurement and processes here is much lower. That means I have a very hard to implement solution, just like this P2P, procure to pay, or procurement suits that we know they're not like plug and play. That's creating a very big friction in terms of the moment that we're currently living in our space. It's like we're living the moment in a timeline in which those providers are being implemented, or their rollout, they're coming to production as of right now in many companies. But since knowledge to implement and process are very mature, they're experiencing a lot of rollbacks, like, oh, that's not working. No, it should work because it's working in Germany. Why it's not working in Brazil? But it's you kind of have to deal with maturity difference also by having a different way to approach this. It's not like you're going to put like a $2 million solution in a company with, I don't know, over 100 people working with this solution. Everything is going to magically work. So I think people didn't realize that, and they're now paying the price. So we have a very problematic eco space, because most of my customers, they do have like an e-procurement suite. They're using a global provider, but it's like they're experiencing like many problems. It's like we're not discussing the good things, like, hey, let's automate, let's make an automation from our spend analysis. No, we're discussing the most basic stuff, like, oh, my invoice is still not coming to my email. Oh, I cannot, we're too basic because of the way people handled, thinking that, that's going to be very simple. Just do it. And it's unfortunately is not like that,
But in defense of the procurement organizations in LATAM, I have to say that a lot of this, I always call it legacy technology. It's not user friendly, and even in developed markets, they're finding that you need to have super users to be able to roll it out and train people within the wider organization. And one of the things that is driving a lot of companies to switch away from these providers is because the software is not user friendly. And it's a huge project. If you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation and you've been running with one procure to pay suite for the last 10 years and suddenly you want to change it. But I think user experience and user friendliness of software and ease of implementation, it's not just a LATAM problem. The interview that I did with Ward Carson from Raindrop a few weeks back, he said the same thing. It's the reason why they're winning business is because fundamentally their solution is easier and quicker to deploy than a lot of the legacy technology. So I think it's a global thing. But I hear what you say. In a less mature environment, it's going to be even more critical for sure. What are you finding about, obviously, Latin America has a much younger workforce, and there is not, in Europe, for example, a lot of the reason why we implement technology is because we want to reduce headcount, because salaries are high, a lot of the workforce is retiring, unemployment is very low. So, automation and getting rid of a lot of administrative tasks from skilled workers is one of the biggest challenges. In LATAM, I guess the dynamics are a little bit different there. So is there, especially with what you're doing around supplier due diligence and compliance, are you finding that compliance and process is more of the driver of why companies want to invest in tech down there versus the automation and the simplification?
I would say that the honest answer would be no. I think the priority would still be like, let's have the transactional part organized. We have to have ability of our spend. We have to know what we are spending. We have to be able to have everything digitalized. That's kind of the first wave, digital procurement, and have the very basic stuff from who are we buying, how much, and had to be able to do some very basic spend analysis. That's the main priority when we talk about what is procurement technology helping to solve. But the problem is, like I said, this doesn't, I would say that's the very hard problem there, like daily basis problem. But I would say there are a lot of other problems that are circling this idea, because like in our space, we're talking about enterprise companies. Most of them are multinationals. Most of them are not like originally Brazilian companies. So when we talk about ESG, risk management, and data management altogether, those companies that are like, they have to have answers for those problems, even though they are like, hey, I don't even have the answer for the transactional part, but I do need to have an answer for my investor in terms of how we analyze ESG problems from our suppliers. Like Germany just put in LKSG, is like the Supplier Due Diligence Act, and it kind of creates a mandatory obligation for every company, every branch in the world to monitor.
Every German company that's operating there. Yeah.
Like Europe just recently did a new legislation regarding cattle and other raw materials. And Brazil is one of the biggest exports of cattle to Europe, for example. So now we don't have options. We have to monitor. We have to have due diligence from suppliers. We have to have data from this and this and this. And Linkana kind of is gaining market in terms of those needs, because those big providers don't have the answers, and the providers that are in Europe, they don't have the local solutions that our companies need. And we do believe that the future of procurement is going to be built by the data solutions. It's like, if I have the best standards of supplier data, like commercial risk, registration, ESG, all of those things combined would make me a very different solution to build a transactional solution. If I have like the best solution for companies to find new suppliers, in a way, there are a lot of customers that ask, hey, Linkana, why can I do an RFY, an RFX, or even to do my whole procure to pay in your solution? It sounds much more simple because you're already recommending me the best supplier. Why not to make the transactional much easier, just as this experience that you're making is for me? So we believe in this future. Our bet is the data solutions are going to overcome the transactional, more pure workflow solutions. And why is that? Because those guys will always have really bad data in their systems. They don't have a way in which those data enter in a good way. So they will always live with this Achilles flaw in their stack. And we believe that's going to be their downfall, for at least for the ones that are not worried or changing or really improving this environment. So that's our strategy. And we do believe there's a lot of market, especially in the biggest companies. So that's why we focus more on enterprise, because that's not a problem that I could really educate or sell to a smaller procurement organization, because that doesn't really resonate,
Yeah, understood. That's really insightful for me, Leo, to get under the hood a little bit of how things work down there and some of the challenges and advantages that you're seeing. And I'm certainly looking forward to hopefully spend this winter in Latin America to escape the cold weather. So if I do make it down there, then it would be awesome to meet up for a beer and a rodizio or an asado, depending on where it is. If anyone would like to learn a little bit more about Linkana, where should we send them?
Of course. I'm always on LinkedIn, just as you. So I'm always posting there as Leo Cavalcanti from Linkana. It's very easy to find me. Linkana, it's at linkana.com. It's always also easy to find us. We're going to be in DPW in Amsterdam this year. So we're going to be the first time in Europe to really get to know the ecosystem. I hope to meet you there, James, as well. We can grab a beer, talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I'm going.
So yeah, and I hope in the midterm, long term, we'll also be opening doors in other countries. And yeah,
Fantastic. I will link to those two places in the show notes. Leo, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. And good to finally get to do this.
Yeah, of course. It was my pleasure. Thanks again for inviting me. Love this show. And till the next time.
So that was Leo talking all about his solution, Linkana, and how procurement tech and the ecosystem in Latin America has its unique challenges and benefits, and a very, very useful insight if you're coming from perhaps Europe or North America and wondering what your colleagues in Latin America are doing on the digitalization side. Just a quick one before we sign off. Don't forget, procurementsoftware.site is the go-to solution if you're looking for Linkana or indeed 330 other procurement tech solutions. You can search, filter, and find everything that matches your individual requirements completely free of charge and in less time than it takes you to boil an egg. Head to procurementsoftware.site and just click on Software Finder and off you go. Until next week, take care. Thanks again for listening and bye for now.